Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't.
Welcome, everyone. Greetings. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Kira Epstein, and I am the co-director of the New School at Commonweal. Today, we launch a series of 3 conversations that feel so important right now. What does love have to do with it? Bringing mystery to peace building. In these 3 conversations, we'll speak with some amazing women who bear witness to the best and the worst of humanity, working and witnessing the front lines of injustice, war, and climate change. These women are peacebuilders, mystics, and storytellers who hold space for the miraculous to emerge, refusing to be bound by a perceived reality of what is possible. Today, we are so honored to welcome the first guest in our series, Deepa Patel. We also welcome a new host to the New School, Serena Bian. I met Serena when she joined the Commonweal board and right away started thinking about what a wonderful host she'd be for a series at the New School. It has been an absolute delight to collaborate with her on this series and see it come into focus. If we agree that peace comes from within, Serena's presence alone can bring us into the landscape of peace building. She has a heart-centered presence that radiates calm and ease. She's extremely modest, but the work she does in the world has a big impact. She serves as a special advisor with U.S. Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy, bringing a spiritual and systemic understanding to the public health crisis of loneliness and isolation. She's also a chaplain in training, and she's pursuing questions of how we chaplain the end of extractive systems that isolate communities from themselves and one another. She's involved with multi-generational, multi-spiritual communities devoted to courage, peace building, and love. You can find recordings on our media sites, and please like and subscribe to our SoundCloud, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify feeds to be notified when the recordings post. I always want to take time to thank Ken Adams, who makes this all run from behind the scenes and whose voice you hear on our podcasts. I think that's all my announcements. So Serena Bian and Deepa Patel and all of you with us, welcome to the New School at Commonweal.
Thank you so much, Kira. And it is so good to be with you and Ken and Deepa and all those who are joined us virtually, as well as those listening to the recorded podcast conversation. I see some new friends, dear friends, old friends, my mother, and I'm so grateful that you all joined. And yeah, Deepa, you are so dear to me and are one of those people who transcends category in every way. And to me, you are an elder, a soul friend, an instrument of the present moment, and a fellow beloved community member in our multi-generational, multi-spiritual, emerging community that is currently called the Nuns and Nuns, but needs a new name, as we all say. And I am simply amazed by you and your deep gift of drawing out the truth of each person's heart and intuiting what is needed to bring people together. During personal moments of discernment and challenge, you have accompanied me with such grace and encouragement. And I see you do that for so many of us in our shared community. And I've witnessed the trajectory of our collective completely shift because of a question you will provoke and the presence that you invite in, and have witnessed that pattern in every room that we've shared. In preparation for our conversation today, I asked several of our friends to share a single word to describe Deepa's essence and put together a little haiku for you. Twinkling mystic light, wondrous love without border, depth-dwelling trickster. And what I've learned about you is that, I think you're able to be this depth-dwelling trickster because of your devotion to walking the path of the mystic and being an agent of love. And your inner beauty reflects outwardly, of course, in the work that you do in the world too, from your work in refugee camps in Malawi and Mozambique, which I'll hope we'll get to talk about today, to serving as a Sufi guide and teacher in your lineage, and advisor, board member to numerous organizations, youth advocate, creative facilitator, peacemaker. No matter where you are, you just bring such a beauty, attentiveness to mystery, and faithful presence that all is possible. And so I'm so grateful you joined or accepted the invitation to be a part of this new school conversation here at Commonweal, to get a glimpse into your spiritual journey and this topic of peace, mystery, and love. And yeah, I just want to say welcome, and I'll turn it over to you to draw us back into this present moment.
Well, Serena, thank you, and Kira and Ken, for inviting me to be here. I'm very glad that you warned me that you were going to be quite flowery. I think it's made it much easier for me to stay present to what you were saying. And I think that that's a really good place to start. So I'd like to invite us just to take a moment and be present to our breath. We don't have to change it. We're just being right here with that feeling of breathing. Feeling the air flowing through our nostrils. Feeling the air flowing out. And on the next exhale, imagine your breath flowing all the way out into the cosmos. And as you breathe in, feeling the breath coming all the way in and becoming like a swing through your heart. And it's very special that we get to spend this time together. I'm grateful to all that are here. So on this next breath, we'll just feel the presence of each of us that's here. And feel ourselves swinging all the way out on our out breath. And for a few moments, we'll contemplate these beautiful words of Thich Nhat Hanh. Nowhere to go. Nothing to do. No one to be. Resting in the present moment. We have nowhere to go. Nothing to do. No one to be. Resting in the present moment. And as we slowly come back to this moment, opening our eyes, knowing that our breath rests, allows us to rest in this moment. So, all right, Serena, I'm ready. What you got?
Hard to move into anything but just being in the present. Thank you, Deepa. And yeah, I wonder, as we're here, what is present with you and on your heart?
Well, I was thinking about this conversation, and in the Sufi lineage and Sufism generally, there's a practice of accounting that we do of our life, of taking a moment to really bear witness to the life that we've lived up until this moment. And one of the things I was struck by is how to talk about the past today. You know, like all of the things that have happened to me have led me to this moment and this conversation. So how to bring all of those into this moment in as respectful a way as possible is kind of what's on my mind, of how to speak of the people that we might speak of with a sense of remembering them, because they come alive in the moment for me when we speak of them again. And that I would say has been a really big part of my practice of how to do that. And to be in integrity, because that doesn't mean it's just a kind of reverence. It's being authentic with what might come in the conversation of the different things that may come. So that's where I am in the present moment, sort of intrigued by which bit of the stories will show themselves, intrigued by who's going to show up, you know, and open to that. But I think this time more than at any other point, there's a real sense of how to consciously respect those that I have engaged with in my life.
There are so many threads from which we could go from, so many characters, so many stories and chapters and versions of you. And I mean, one beautiful place to begin is simply, where were you born, Deepa? And into what kind of culture were you born into?
So I was born in Nairobi, Kenya, and I'm third generation Kenyan. So grandparents that were born there, parents that were born there, and then myself and my brother. Of course, of Indian heritage. And that, of course, has to do with the British Raj. So a product, as it were, of colonialism in its way. And I grew up, I was born to a father who was a doctor, a general practitioner, and a mother who was actually doing her master's in botany at the time, one of the first women actually that had done that in Kampala. So this real mix of intellect and brilliance in one way. And I lived in Kenya till I was 10 years old. And my father had come to England during my 9th year. And he had to go and do some training. And halfway through, he said, "We're moving." And it was, that classic thing of a parent who wanted the best for his family and his children. And I think all three of us were like, "No, we don't want to go." We just moved into a beautiful new house. It was like, we were so excited about where we were going to be. And England, I don't know, that was not our favorite place. So it was a tough move in some ways at 10. And we moved to a little English village, and we were the first Asian family in that village. And so it wasn't easy for any of us to kind of find our feet when we first landed in England. And weirdly, I about 6 years ago moved back to that village that we first moved to, having traveled all over the place. And it's sort of been a very interesting thing to land back in the place where I grew up, really.
To be
that
place of remembrance, having traveled so many places, lived so many lives. And I guess in this moment, when you look back on your 10-year-old self, what threads of connection and connection do you feel, or question?
Well, it's always serendipity is always a funny thing, right, Serena? Because that 10-year-old's been around a lot this last 3 or 4 days. So it's sort of interesting to feel her presence and to also see what she's bringing. I think when I left Kenya, I was in this like top of my class, really clever, bright student. And then I moved into this school where I was the only person of color, and I didn't understand the system and I didn't understand the culture. And so I went from one thing to a kind of quite a broken 10-year-old in some ways. And she still shows herself when I'm kind of stuck in trying to work my way through different cultures. So yeah, she's around, but a constant teacher in a way of how to be present to that very vulnerable self, while at the same time open to what I might be learning now from her. And what I'm learning now from her is a pattern which kind of emerged from it, which was because of that fear, a sort of sense of I realized one of my mantras is mañana. And I hadn't kind of clocked how much it was a mantra until this last week. I knew it, but I didn't know that it was in relation to her, really. So it's been a kind of discovery the last few days of what happens if I accept that one of my mantras is mañana. How do I live my life, right? Not being in judgment of it, but just kind of going, yeah, this is a part of what belongs to my story, as it were. So I wasn't expecting to tell you that. So this is already a surprising conversation, which I think is probably a good thing, right?
Well, to be 10 years old and to move through that profound moment of change and in some ways loss and the unknown, and curious how you as a 10-year-old moved through that moment of unknown. I guess I ask because I see you as such a teacher to me of being with the unknown, and so curious about these like really formative and tender moments when we first really step into that for the first time.
I mean, when you say that, one of the earlier I went for a walk and I was behind this little child who stopped nearly every few feet, completely curious about what was on the ground. And that curiosity is what I think helps me to just want to be present to the unknown, just being like that child who's like, oh, look at that. There's this kind of awe of life and the way it shows itself in the most disturbing of situations and the most, awe-inspiring situations. So I really feel like that's been one of the joys of my life, to kind of always have that curiosity, to always kind of stop and to really kind of go, what is this? Because everything is new in that way. So yeah, I think that was one of the saving graces of being of my childhood, and then carrying on in what feels like a very childlike way. That would be my I often say one of the heroes of my life is again a Sufi. I can call her a teacher, but she was an extraordinary woman called Noor Inayat Khan, and Noor was a spy, and she was in the Second World War, and she was captured and taken to Dachau, and as she was shot, the word that came out of her mouth was liberté. And one of the things that has fascinated me is about what is the last word that will come out of my mouth. You know, they say Gandhi's was Ram, and Steve Jobs was wow. And so if I'm trying to work out where am I going in my life, then one of the things is always, what's the last word going to be? And at the moment, it still feels like that complete kind of in-breath of surprise as to what's happening next. But yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. My understanding is that you didn't grow up in a Sufi household, and just curious what led you into your path.
Yeah, I grew up in a household of the pursuit of the truth. My grandmother was a devotee of Sri Aurobindo and the mother, and it was quite unusual for a woman in Kenya, in that kind of society, to not follow kind of conventional Hinduism, but to have found this, supramental yoga. And so she was a real inspiration of being someone who was a seeker, really. And my grandfather on my dad's side was also a real seeker of truth in another mystical direction. And my father was a real seeker. So I grew up in a family of seekers. And I think that from when I was a kid, my first teacher was Krishnamurti, and I was begging my parents to let me go to the school that Krishnamurti had founded in England, but that wasn't to be the case. And that seeking path took me through a number of different things. And then I arrived on the Sufi path because I went to a retreat, and all I knew about it was that it was an alchemical retreat. I didn't know what Sufism was. I didn't know anything. But I went to this alchemical retreat, and there I found the lineage of Hazrat Anar Khan. And I, like so many people say when they find that place, it was like arriving home. He was a place that was totally and utterly devoted to music, which is sort of, one of the closest things in my life. And it was committed to the honoring of the different faith traditions, and it was committed to this process of alchemy, which even to this day, when people go, what's alchemy? I'm like, I don't know. I can't tell you what it is, because all it feels like to me is a constant experience of transformation and transmutation and, all of that. So that's how I found myself on this path.
And to you, Deepa, what is the heart of the Sufi message, or the essential question that this practice provokes?
The heart of the Sufi message is the heart, which sounds like a strange thing to say, but it's really a practice of the heart. The heart within Sufism, it's like they say, where can you find God? And the answer is you find God in the heart of a sincere seeker. And so the living in, living from, living within the heart is one of the things that's central to it. And Hazrat Anar Khan was a musician, and I think that and he was a Indian classical musician, and I don't know if you know that much about it, but the raga system is founded on the idea of pure improvisation, that the note that's played in the morning is different to the note that's played in the evening, that's different to wherever you are, and one has to tune oneself and the instrument to become totally present to this moment, right? To be able to hear the notes and then to play them, to improvise. It's a part of true musicality, which is why it's so dear to me. And it's all done in the pursuit of beauty. And I think that pursuit is kind of feels very central to how I live my life in any given moment.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's like one of those things I could say a million words, but I'm not sure that I'll convey the fullness of the Sufi message in this way. But I hope that some of those words give people the smell of that past, as it were,
Mm-hmm.
the whiff of the fragrance of the past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been something that I feel like I have experienced through just being around you, and in moments where I come to you, Deepa, and I'm like, what do I do about this particular situation or decision, or even personal and professional and related to work? I'm just so moved by. I feel like you've talked before of when in doubt, like turn towards beauty, and now is the moment to trust in a bigger love and to grow in faith. And I find, as someone that often grasps for the answer or for a particular decision, just that reminder of the motion of, rather than trying to, I think we were doing this on a call last week, of grabbing for what is in front, actually just opening up and the hands orienting towards the sky. And so that's one way that I feel like I've come to understand the breadth and depth of these teachings from relationship with you. Well, I'm so curious about the work that you do working with displaced peoples and in refugee camps. And I know that at least since 2016, you've worked in refugee camps from Jordan, Mozambique, Malawi, and you wrote a beautiful reflection last November that I'd love to just read a couple of words from and ask for your reflections. I am writing this from Africa, where I have been working in refugee camps in Malawi and Mozambique for the last 10 days. I would like to invite you to take a seat in a circle, which is made of known and unknown beings. The known I have met in flesh, the unknown are still in my imagination. As in any circle made in the heart, the space is limitless. Here, there are refugees from the Democratic Republic of Congo, Syria, Burundi, and Rwanda who have escaped war, genocide, insurgency, political abuse, and gender-based violence. There are local Malawians and Mozambicans. There are staff. There are local nonprofits. And my life collaborator, Helen, is next to me. Our circle is aged between 72 and a yet-to-be-born baby. One of the refugees has been here for 22 years, and a few have been born in this camp. Our conversation ebbs and flows between learning new skills, laughter, singing, and hearing stories of pain and courage, which are often followed by silence as tears flow and hearts are broken. The writer Graham Greene said, "Hate was a failure of imagination." In our work in the camps and in this circle, it feels as though without the audacity it takes to imagine the impossible, we are doomed to fail. What does my reading this bring you back to?
I can feel the tears in my eyes. I'm a week from going back to Malawi and Mozambique, and there's a there's a real sense of the hardship that the people I work with are going through. And then when I feel that in relation to Gaza or to Sudan or to wherever, I think that the thing that brings my tears is always about this extraordinary capacity we have to dehumanize each other. And then not only do we dehumanize each other, but that goes to landscape and animals and the earth. And so you're reading those words brings those tears of what it means to go back there without knowing, with like giving up on trying to fix things, you know, to be able to go and be present to pain without succumbing to that idea that something is going to get fixed in this process. So, and the tears are also to do with it is a circle, and there's always this just extraordinary joy. One of the things about working in refugee camps is that there's no bullshit, you know. These are people that have seen the worst of things and yet have found a way to carry on. And everyone can smell bullshit a mile away. So one has to be incredibly authentic to show up in that place. But also because there's no bullshit, there's a power for both the power of tears and of joy always present. And there's something that in me feels very relieved about being in a place where there's no bullshit. You know what I mean? There's just like, okay, there's no escape from anything. It's like I have to be there, fully there. So there's also the longing of what it means to go back to those places and to see what happens when we really do come together and to really feel what might be possible, just even if it's just briefly to find a sense of I'm going to keep going kind of thing. So yeah, when you read that out, that's part of what comes up.
You also make brief mention of a group of young men called the Sepologists.
Yes.
I'm right. I wonder if you might share the story of them.
Oh, Serena, the Sepologist. So Sepology started in the DRC, and it was literally, it's a movement of protest of men who kind of took on this whole thing of dressing up as though the only thing that you could do is dress to the nines, you know, like the clothes they wear are quite extraordinary, so beautiful. And it's sort of extraordinary to see this movement that really came about as a protest to colonialism. And if you look at it, you're like, well, they just look like they're dressed in suits, you know, extraordinary suits, and how can that be a protest? But for the young men in the camp, for them, it is a kind of way of not getting involved in gangs, of not getting involved in crime, of not leading the life of hopelessness. There's like something about how fashion is kind of giving them the capacity to really stand in themselves. And it's like just pure awe of just watching them. And they get really excited because many of them are kind of creating their own clothes, you know. So that they like, and the attention to detail is phenomenal. You know, here's my little pocket, which is the same as this, you know, fabric of my trousers, which is the same as the the linen, the lining of my coat, and it just goes on and on, kind of thing. And it's kind of extraordinary to be with them as they share themselves in all of their pride and just humor. I love the apologists, and they have one of them is called Golden, and they have extraordinary. One of them is called Light, and you know, it's like to be around people that are called Golden and Light, and to just see these young boys just. Yeah, because a refugee camp is not a place that you dress up and walk down in these just dust-filled streets, but they do it every day in one way or another. So, yeah.
In your writing and just in my being and shared gatherings and retreats with you, I've always noticed a particular tenderness you have towards young people, towards children, towards babies, towards our youth. And I know that you've worked as a youth worker, as an ED of a Sufi meditation camp, of, I'm sure, sitting in these circles with such an attentiveness towards the young. And would just love to hear where that comes from for you, and what is the light that our young people are bringing in this world.
I think it, as I was saying earlier, I think that curiosity that children have is something that we forget very easily as we grow up, and just being around children and having that kind of playfulness and capacity to sort of be themselves is something that I really want to constantly honor. And you just, you know, I was saying to you, I was interested to see who shows up as we start talking. And there's this young girl. At one point, I did a project with Helen and a couple of other people called Ideas That Can Change the World. And it was really based on working with young people and adults to kind of find a way to really bring our thinking together. And so we we're trying to find the right age to work with. So we went up to a school in Scotland where they have a room called Room 13. And Room 13 was designated as a room that any child could go to throughout the school day if they were having a bit of a rough time. It was a creative space, and you went in there to read or to paint or to just hang out. And the CEO of Room 13 was an 11-year-old, you know, who went up to me, and it was kind of this extraordinary thing of like, they really owned Room 13, and Room 13 spread, and there's rooms now in South Africa and other places. But we sort of were interested in that age, 10 to sort of 11. And we sat in a circle, and we did this thing of like, you know, what do you see as the problems in the world, and what could we do to change them? And it was like, you know, as we went around, it was like, well, the problem is all of these weapons. If we just got rid of all the guns, then everything would be okay. And this young kid goes, yeah, we should just throw them all into the ocean. And it was like, and then another one goes, no, we can't throw them into the ocean because what happens to the fish? And this kind of went on, you know, and it was like, well, then maybe we should put all the people that are disagreeing, put them in a room and lock the room and say, you can't come out until you've sorted it out. And some days I think about that when I look at the world right now and go, what would happen if you did that? And then someone else was like, no, I don't think that's a good idea to lock people up. And so there's this dialogue going on. And then at one point, this little girl next to me had been very quiet. And she looks and she goes, yeah, what if you could show that really all of us are related to each other? And I could feel like the whole room kind of open at that moment. And I looked at her and I said, yeah, like, wouldn't it be amazing if you and I like worked out that actually we're one family. And her face, it was like, you know, the wisdom of children doesn't always take on what they've said, right? But at that moment, she's like, wait a minute. I mean, you're Indian, I'm a little Scottish girl. What are you talking about? And so then the thing that we did was to kind of work with a geneticist and to look at DNA. So it became like an education project in itself. So I'm really glad that she's here because she still inspires that. And then we did a project with a young boy, and we were at, I won't name the big corporation that we were working with, but they were doing one of those exercises for their marketing department, you know, so that they, whatever. And we'd said, oh, it'd be really worth listening to where young kids are at. And so we're sitting in a circle, and all these marketing people had their pens, and they were like listening attentively to what a young person had to say. And there was this young boy, and he's like, well, I think the problem is respect. We don't respect each other. And they were like, oh, yes, yes, you know, really sort of eager and keen. And I was watching him, he was looking at me, and I was like, so what do you think we should be asking? What's the question we should be asking? And he turned around and goes, well, why should anyone respect you? And it was like that moment where you kind of go, okay, you've just blown any cover that we could possibly have. And it's like, why should anyone respect you? You know? And that started off a whole thing. So for me, young people do that. They just, yeah, there's always that opportunity. It doesn't matter where we are. That happens. So thank you for letting me bring them into the room, because they're very special to me. They remind me of possibility of what's possible in the world.
Of magic. That magic happens. Yeah.
Why would anyone respect you? Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. There was oh gosh, something you wrote as well. Yeah, that this is a reflection of your time. I think it was in a Syrian refugee camp, and you say that magic can happen, and don't stop believing in magic. And for the children born in that camp for whom hardship is so normal, and who are defined by the longing of their parents and grandparents to return to former lives, they are the magicians of our time, and anything we can do to help them remember how extraordinary they are will benefit the whole world. Yeah, so just so grateful for that orientation, and for the two that you just brought in addition to so many who are in these camps.
Can I tell you one more?
Please.
During COVID, we were doing an animation project with some of the kids in Zatari. So we were meeting, you know, online. And
was this the Syrian refugee camp?
This is the Syrian refugee camp. And part of the question was, you know, how are you spending your time during COVID? And this young girl goes, I'm learning how to speak Japanese. And it was that moment of what it means to live in a digital world, that this little girl who hardly has access to anything, but for some reason she had a connection to Japan, and whenever she could, she'd get onto YouTube to watch YouTube clips on, and was learning Japanese. And it was like the level of awe that we all felt in that moment. It's like, of course, what else are we going to do? And we're in a lockdown. But yeah, she comes to mind too.
Thank you. And I just want to remind those who are listening that if you have questions at any point, to please put them in the chat, and we'll incorporate it into our conversation with Deepa. I mean, that's so beautiful. Just the awe and the curiosity, and just the learning that happens. And I guess I'm curious, Deepa, what are you learning about in this moment, or what learnings feel ripe for you?
I think Gaza is teaching me a whole new level of how to be present with someone whose views I may not share, and how to do that in a way that's both respectful, but where I don't lose my own sense of justice. And that requires a capacity to think beautifully in a way that's both challenging and also really important. I'm watching the protests, like so many of us are, alongside the dying. And I was a complete activist. It's at university. I think I spent my whole time in vigils and protesting various and different things. So there's something that's being invoked within me as I watch them, and I'm sort of really present to where am I on this spectrum? And I have the luxury to think that question in a way that, our brothers and sisters in Gaza or in the Congo, there's 10 million people that are lost to genocide in the Congo. And none of us know about that because we benefit from why that genocide has happened in terms of the extractive minerals that we get from it. So the learning is about what defines protest for me in this moment. What can I really do? Because I think the lack of agency that we all feel in different ways is sort of central to part of what's going on. And because there are no clear answers, this requires a sort of walking into the unknown in a way that's there's a guilt for the luxury of time, as well as the just urgency of what's needed, and both of those are sort of very much the kind of Gordian knot in my being at the moment.
When you talk about protest and the ways that showed up for you when you were in university and now in this moment, I'm just so curious how you think about that, especially from the depths of Sufism and the different levels of reality that we are working in and with, and when the violence is so real and so material, how do we work with and bring in the immaterial while not escaping the material in protest and in advocacy and in action that also invites in that which we cannot see?
I mean, one thing that I feel that I'm learning is what it means to truly bear witness. And what I mean by that is that I'm very aware of that much of the way that I was bearing witness in Jordan, which changed actually in Mozambique, was the bearing witness was coming from a place of how can we change this? And there was a moment when the people in the camp in Mozambique have been there for 23 years, and they live this cycle of, they make these houses predominantly out of sand, and then the hurricane comes, and the hurricane season is, from November to February, depending on what the hurricane's like. The house is completely destroyed, and so they rebuild the house, and then they rebuild the house, and it's just watching that cycle. But there was a moment where I walked into a woman's house. It was just, the situation was so terrible. And this is within a UNHCR camp. So there's a kind of like, what is the purpose of these institutions? But I also realized that in that moment, I couldn't look this woman in the face. There was a part of me that just didn't have that capacity to do it. And she was looking straight at me. And I think that ripped a veil over my heart, which, although it was very painful at the time, was a veil that needed to be ripped. Because it actually, I realized, still kept me away from truly being present and to look someone in the eye and to not shy away from what they were experiencing. So I think that capacity is something that has transformed the way that I'm showing up for what we're doing. And what's nice about being at the New School is I can say this. I probably wouldn't share this story in any other context, but having been ripped open like that, one of the things that happened when I was next going back to Malawi is, I'm curious about this whole process of how do we call in ancestors, and what happens to the animals that live in these spaces, and what's my relationship to all of those. And I knew I had to go back to Malawi from a different place. And I remember really sitting in the dark, just such despair of how can we do this to each other as human beings, just really not knowing a way out. And in my meditation, as I was we use the words tuning in, as I was tuning in to the land where I was going, because I think that's a big part to actually kind of take time to do that, I could hear the ancestors of that land. And there was a whole part of me that it felt like a deep invitation to go there. And it was so powerful to be that broken and to hear the voice of those ancestors calling. And then in my dreams for 3 or 4 days, I just kept hearing the roar of lions. It was just, they were so present, the lions and the lionesses. And it was like, because in terms of this physical body, I feel like I belong to Africa. That's somewhere in me, that's the continent. And so to have these ancestors and to have the lion kind of calling was just, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to go, because now I'm invited to go to be in this place. So when you talk about what's that bigger capacity that for myself that I'm trying to look at, is what all of these things mean. And if we take that a bit further, I'm in this beautiful cohort, thanks to FETSA, of what we call the global majority, which is a term that in the US is called BIPOC. And one of the conversations there has been, well, what if our ancestors don't get on with each other? And that's such a living question, right? Like, we don't stop we're sort of in this, but wait a minute, what happens if our ancestors? So I think there's a constant invitation to pay attention to these other dimensions that we're talking about. What does it mean to live with the roar of the lion? What does it mean to be present to extinction of different things? And that provides possibility in a new way, from where I'm sitting, to even enter into being present. So now the lions are here, the ancestors of this is, the room's getting filled up, plus these wonderful people that are with us. And I'm looking at all the names and, knowing so many of them, and having sharing my journey with so many of them. So it's sort of nice to feel their presence here too.
Deepa, Thank you. What does heresy have to do with all of this? Well,
somewhere in the lockdown, if you had asked me, I was the person that said, well, love's the answer. You know, whatever the question is, love's the answer. And there was a moment that I was curious about heresy. I was curious about it for myself. Like, what would be heretical to me, like truly heretical to me? And I think that the most heretical thing that I could have said in that moment is to go, well, actually, no, love isn't the answer.
Mm-hmm.
There was this sense of, like, really, because then I had to really examine, well, why is that heretical? What does heresy mean? And what is my relationship to love as a result of this? You know, how can I believe this thing, which I think heresy requires a questioning. And in some ways, that is such a powerful thing, to question something, to really examine it fully, you know, to examine it in the same way as we have that know thyself is part of what we're here to do. So the heresy came from that, and it was a very important moment. And so that heresy keeps being a question of what feels heretical to me, because it's usually an indication of that I haven't fully examined something, to be able to sort of fully stand up and say, yes, love is the answer. Now it's not just coming from a deep place of faith, but it's coming from a deep place of examination, on many different levels. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'm curious if there are particular experiences or moments when you were in that journey during the lockdown around examining love as not being the answer, and what did you find? And and is love not the answer? If so, pray tell.
What is? You know, it was a curious thing. I guess because there was such a childlike enthusiasm for love. And well, actually, there is bigger than just child. There's just a deep enthusiasm for love for me. I sort of feel like, you know, how Einstein was obsessed with light. I'm obsessed with love in the same sort of way. I just wish I could find what that theory of relativity is, or whatever, in relationship. So the heresy was a sort of a big thing, and part of it was, I don't know if it reached a kind of rationality in terms of the question. I don't know if I can really vocalize some of that, and that's why I'm very grateful to the Sufi path and to Hazrat Nag Khan, who's talked a lot about the power of silence. Like, you and I could have sat in silence in this conversation, and at the end shared what we got out of it. And I wonder whether it might have been the same as if we talked or not. But I think that examination of heresy took me much, much deeper into silence and into emptiness in a way that I've really, it's like knowing where I belong now, in some ways. So I don't know if I would have experienced it as fully, what the heresy was about, or I don't know if I'd know love in that way, which hopefully you can feel it, because I don't know if we can ever speak some things, and they're better left unspoken, right? So I'd say, without shirking my responsibility of answering your question, that's really what happened in that process.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And in that, or next to the what you talk about with the emptiness and the silence, just the word like the mythopoetic comes to mind, as well as, we won't rationalize what you said, our way into some answers, into some ways of figuring things out, and there's that need for the mythopoetic, and I'd just love to hear how that may have shown up for you in that journey, or just in what is present and how you are moving in this moment.
There's a political philosopher whose first name I can't remember, but whose second name is Critchlow. And one of the things that he talks about is that in the kinds of times that we're living in, that what is needed most is the poetic voice and what it means to live a poetic life. So maybe even more than the voice, it comes down to what does a poetic life look like, which feels like I think it, one of my questions is always, would I say this in front of a refugee? So I'm just taking that moment to feel some of the people that I live with, and when I'm in Malawi. And I think I would say this, that there's something about what it means to live a poetic life, because I see that in all of the different ways that they try and make sense of their lives there, which are, very tricky in so many different ways. So it feels real to try and find the poetic in those spaces, as well as in this one. It's good to I'm always grateful when that happens, because it's a little bit like, again, sort of taking on the different worlds in which I mix, and would I say this there, and what would I say here? And that's part of the way of navigating life. I'm suddenly aware of one of the people that showed me this was an amazing priest from Uganda called Reverend Gideon Bamagisha, and he was one of the first people to come out as being HIV positive in Uganda. And for a priest to do that was a really, really tough thing. This is at the beginning of that pandemic, that global pandemic. And I always feel him at my shoulder when I'm starting to speak about different things. He's that reminder of how one speaks in a given moment. And I think that Reverend Gideon also had it was a deeply poetic life in the way that he approached it. And what do we mean by that, right? Which I think, again, comes down to a kind of artistry, how to show up in any group of people and listen and make art in the dialogue that is happening. And he would do that in all of the different, from those massive big UN General Assemblies to small gatherings. There was something about the creation of art, poeticness, that would allow for the sense of possibility to happen. And I think that's one of the things that the poetic gives, is that sense of possibility or that sense of the role of imagination, and that's kind of combined with courage. So all three sort of come into themselves in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Because often poets say the things that others can't.
Right. Yeah. I am so grateful for that reflection and just the orientation towards that of the artist, and just as I listen to you, Deepa, what's happening inside of me is also just this inner quieting, and just that place of silence from which things are born and found, and grateful for the ways that throughout this conversation, and just even in hearing segments of your life and story, there's been that continual like dipping into that orientation. And I guess the thing that's really with me right now is a memory of when I came to you. This must have been 3-4 months ago, and we were at a gathering of maybe 300 people, activists, artists, social healers, many people who have written many books, and as you know, I work in federal government in public health for Dr. Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General on loneliness and social isolation. And the work being at the federal level, it's affiliated with the institution, with the ways that traditional public health paradigms push towards different solutions. And yet, when we talk about loneliness, when we talk about spirit, when we talk about mystery, it is so hard to capture that in that public domain. And I was so lost during that gathering, and so lost in translation. I didn't know where to find myself representing this office, which holds particular views of how change happens and the level at which the change should happen. And you found me, and you sat next to me, and you put your arm around me, and as we were listening to a talk, and you just invited me into a place of prayer, and a place of instead of contracting my heart in the face of contradiction and my own confusion as to where I sit in this work, just the act of prayer and the act of opening to love or faith or mystery or heresy, it really cracked something in me that was so needed. And then I've witnessed the ways in which you've joined alongside our office's work as almost a provocateur of like, don't forget the prophecy in the policy work, people. Don't forget that. And I thought to myself, I don't know if the word heresy and prophecy have ever been used in the office of the Surgeon General since its founding many decades ago. And that was such a joy. And so I just feel, so grateful to you for that.
Well, if there was ever a need for prophecy, it feels like now is the time, right? So feels like we need to be cheeky, audacious, and bring in words that aren't spoken in different places. It it might not make any difference in that instance, but we're all searching for something. Some of us are aware of it, some of us aren't, and that too is an important part of what this is about. I feel like you've asked me so many questions, and we could do this all over again, and I could go, well, Serena, and what do you mean by love? And then we'd go off on a whole other tangent, and then we've got all these people who all have something to say about everything that we've talked about, which I'm aware of.
For sure. And I'd love to actually bring in someone else's question in the chat, if you're open to it. We have a question from Nikita, who asks, what are some of the most important, potent bridge building techniques for bringing polarized groups into dialogue, curiosity, and peace?
Nikita, I want to tell you a story, because to me it's an illustration of something, and maybe it will help you to see it. We were in Mozambique, and we'd been doing these workshops on curiosity and imagination, Helen and I had, and UNHCR always says, and will you meet with the young people? And we're like, yes, of course we'll meet with the young people. And so we'd prepared this workshop, and then we looked out the window and realized that what was coming towards us was about 15 young men. And our workshop was definitely not for 15 young men who belonged to the football clubs of the refugee camp. And so there's this moment of hesitation of like, oh my God, what do we do right now? And I tell this story because we decided in that moment that we were going to stick to what we were doing. But what was amazing was that in that one moment, finally, this young man put his hand up and said, you can talk all you want, but you kept us waiting, and we didn't know that we'd kept them waiting. And two, we've been here in this heat, and you haven't even offered us water. And it was like one of those moments where like, okay, like this needs addressing on a whole other level. So we started the conversation. Helen went looking for water, and I looked at him and said, what do you say more? And so I think the invitation or the bridge building that I see for myself is that capacity to be in the room, to once again look at someone and be present to just how angry he was in that moment, of how much has been promised to the young people that live in these camps. Because, the reality for UNHCR is that they have their staff changes nearly every 6 months, and they have someone else who'll come in and go, we're going to consult with the young people about what they want, and they've already told them, and they go through the same thing. So we were once again in that situation, and to really be present to someone's anger without moving away from it, I think that that's one of the bridge building techniques in terms of dialogue and curiosity. And then to not let go, because he said some things which I disagreed with. And normally in that situation, you'd be like, all right, well, this is a tense situation, so I'm not going to disagree with him. But actually, it was really important that I did disagree with him and say, well, I'm just not sure. How I did it was important, but to stay in the dialogue. So he knew that I wasn't just going to piss about, that I was serious about the dialogue that we were having. And it wasn't the most pleasant of conversations. And I think part of this is, how do we learn to sit in our discomfort in these places without trying to make peace a false kind of peace in that situation, or I'm listening, but you're not really listening because actually you're really terrified about what you're facing. So I see those as some of the things that are really needed, but most of it is about our capacity. And I think this also goes to the heart of Sufism, is to be completely present in our senses all 5 of our senses to be present to smell and taste and sound and sight, which allow me to kind of go, what's really going on here? What's truly needed here? Can I get out of the way and listen for those things? And normally those things have seen me be able to bridge whatever the conversation is that's needed without shying away from it. And it was painful, and there were tears in the room, and some of the others didn't want us to have the conversation because we were guests in the camp. So I hope that answers the question, but in just the real terms of where I come from in any of those spaces that I'm facilitating in, to be fully there in all ways. So, yes, I hope that answers it. Friend Adam, with the invocation of poetry and imagination of the cheeky and audacious and the office of the Surgeon General, Deepa, if you could create a national, international, or mythic office, what would it be? What would its charge be? Oh, Adam. Well, I think it would be an office where there would be a lot of space for silence. I was creating an office where that whole idea, an office that was really based on how to be instruments of the present moment, would be the key training for this office, which would mean not only knowing the note that we have come to play, another important part of the Sufi message, but also to be able to listen to the notes that are being played by others, and from that to make the music that's needed for the moment, which hopefully would lead us to the next thing and the next thing, that this is an ongoing process. And because that has both that element of improvisation and creativity, what would be its charge? Well, one of the things that I've been thinking about is the civic problem of our time, right? I don't know if there's just one, but I think one of the main ones is that we don't know how to be in the present moment. And actually, if our education systems and all of these spaces were set up to really create that capacity for us to live here in the here and now, then I'm up for that adventure to see what we would end up doing as human beings. And that's not an easy thing to say. I mean, I just look at one of the things I'm fascinated by at the moment is how I think the same thoughts every day, and there's all of the research that's done on it, but so unconscious. They're just the same. It's exactly the same narrative. I, who am trying to live in the present moment, just have the same bloody narrative going through my head, right? So it takes a lot to break that, to truly. And so to have an office where that was part of the work of that office was to show us how to break that, I think that would be quite a thing. In terms of the mythic office, of course, there'd be lots of pranks and jokes and a whole number of other things. And yes, Christina, we would tend to our heartbreak on a daily basis. How do I tend to my heartbreak on a daily basis? Wear it on a sleeve. It sounds cheesy. Sorry to be cheesy, people, but it's the Leonard Cohen line of "that's how the light gets in." It's sort of knowing that that's because that's how the light gets in, that I'm very willing to tend to my heartbreak. But again, I'm not sure it's always an easy thing. One has to love to do that.
In the same
I love
also that no need for that perfect offering, right? And just in the cracks, that's where the light gets in.
Yeah.
In the spirit of all that is present within the silence and in the present moment, Deepa, perhaps we could close out our conversation today with some of that. And if there's a way you'd like to invite us into that, welcome you to do so. And before that, just again wanted to express such a deep bow of gratitude to you for your beingness, and to everybody who's joined in on our conversation today, and the wider circles that Deepa you've brought in, and that we all sit in together. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you, and over to you.
Thank you, Serena. Well, it seems like in a moment we will be transitioning to whatever other spaces we're going to. So maybe we can once again come back to our breath. Just that beautiful moment of sipping on the thing that is the reason that we're here, our breath. Just allowing ourselves to luxuriate in it as we can. And again, once more, the invitation is there is nowhere to go, nothing to do, no one to be, resting in the present moment. Maybe we'll take a moment to say thank you. I hope that you too are remembering the people in your lives, the moments in your lives that allow you to keep going. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Deepa and Serena. So much appreciation. It's hard to step into the depth that you've just created there. Just a beautiful way to, at least in our area, start the morning, and in your area, start the evening. Thank you for bringing what I just feel as your whole selves to this conversation, for the beauty of it, and for the work you are doing in the world. I feel like this conversation offers a guidepost for our listeners to explore how we can build peace and resilience in ourselves. So I just appreciate it so much. To join us for the May and June conversations in this series, you can find out more about them on our website, tns.commonweal.org. Deepa, Patel, and Serena Bian, thank you for joining us at the New School at Commonweal. We'll see you next time, everyone.
Don't take it, don't. 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 Don't take it, don't.